The iron shackle bit into his ankle like the teeth of a patient wolf. Epictetus had stopped noticing it years ago. The weight, the chafing, the way it clinched tighter when the Mediterranean humidity made the metal contract. What he noticed instead, on this particular morning in Nicopolis, was the quality of light streaming through the doorway of his modest dwelling, and how a spider had constructed an intricate web in the corner, unbothered by the philosophical discussions that had raged beneath it the night before. "Master," one of his students called from outside. The word always made Epictetus smile, though not pleasantly. He'd been called many things in his 50-some years: slave, crippled, teacher, philosopher. But master struck him as the most absurd. A man who'd spent the first 30 years of his life as property, whose leg had been broken by his owner and never set properly, who owned nothing but a straw mat and clay lamp, was hardly anyone's master. "Come in, Arian," he said, recognizing the voice, "and stop calling me that. We've discussed this." The young man entered, scrolls tucked under his arm, his face flushed with excitement or distress. Epictetus had learned these often looked identical on the young. But the others? "The others can call me whatever soothes their need for hierarchy. You know better." Arian settled himself on the floor, cross-legged, and Epictetus saw the boy, for he was still a boy, despite his 20-odd years, wrestling with something. The morning light caught the dust motes between them, tiny universes spinning in their own orbits, subject to laws they'd never comprehend. "Speak," Epictetus said. "Whatever's gnawing at you will only grow teeth if you feed it silence. My father sent word from Rome. He's arranged a position for me in the Senate, an advantageous marriage, property in Bithynia." Arian's voice carried the weight of confession. "He says I've wasted enough time in Greece playing at philosophy." Epictetus shifted his bad leg, feeling the familiar ache that came with morning dampness. "And what do you say?" "I don't know what to say. That's why I'm here." "No." Epictetus shook his head. "You know exactly what you say. You just haven't admitted you know it yet. The question isn't what you should do. The question is why you're afraid of what you already know you want to do." The young man's face reddened. "I'm not afraid." "Everyone's afraid. Fear is as common as breathing. The question is whether you'll let it steer you like a master steers a slave." He paused, let the words settle. "Or perhaps that's precisely the question you're avoiding." Arian looked up sharply. "You're afraid that choosing philosophy over your father's path makes you foolish. You're afraid that rejecting comfort and prestige makes you a failure. You're afraid that what you want and what you should want are two different things, and you'll never reconcile them." Epictetus leaned forward. "Am I close?" "Uncomfortably so." "Good. Discomfort is where philosophy lives. Comfort is where it dies." The student ran his fingers over the scrolls he'd brought, Chrysippus's writings on logic worn from use. "How did you know? When you chose this life, this path, how did you know it was right?" And there it was. The question Epictetus had been asked 1,000 times, in 1,000 variations, always by people who believed that somewhere, somehow, there existed a formula for certainty, a map to rightness. They came to him seeking the thing he'd learned through decades of bondage and freedom didn't exist. He'd have to tell Arian a story. The young only learned through stories, and even then they usually learned the wrong lessons. "I didn't choose this life," Epictetus said. "Let me tell you how I didn't choose it." Rome, some 30 years earlier, smelled of human waste and ambition in equal measure. Epictetus, then known simply as the property of Epaphroditus, a name he hadn't chosen, wouldn't keep, that meant simply acquired, stood in the kitchens of his master's palatial home on the Palatine Hill, grinding grain. The repetitive motion had a rhythm to it. Push, turn, push, turn, the stone wheel groaning against the stone base, the grain surrendering to inevitability. His hands bled. They always bled. The stone was unforgiving, and the quantity demanded was impossible. But impossibility had never excused a slave from expectations. "You're doing it wrong," Antonius said. "Another slave, older, meaner, faster. The household needs bread before midday." Epictetus didn't respond. He'd learned early that words were luxuries slaves couldn't afford. Every sentence was a potential insult, every silence a potential insolence. Better to exist in the narrow space between, to become as unremarkable as stone. But something in him, he couldn't name it then, wouldn't have the vocabulary for it until much later, refused to become stone. He'd been 12 when the slave traders took him from Phrygia, too young to remember his mother's face clearly, old enough to remember how she screamed. The market in Rome had smelled of sweat and fear, hundreds of human beings arranged like merchandise. And he'd been purchased by Epaphroditus for his size, his youth, his potential for molding. "You'll work in the kitchens until you're 15, Epaphroditus had said on that first day. "Then we'll see if you're worth training for something better. The emperor values educated slaves. Intelligence is profitable." Epictetus had nodded, understanding even then that better was relative when you were property. The years in the kitchen passed like water through a sieve. You knew time was moving, but couldn't hold any of it. Wake before dawn, prepare the morning meal, clean the dishes. Prepare the midday meal, clean the dishes, prepare the evening meal, clean the dishes, collapse on a straw mat in the slaves' quarters. Repeat. Sundays were no different. Feast days meant more work, not less. Sickness was irrelevant. Age was irrelevant. You worked until you couldn't, and then you were sold or discarded, and someone younger and stronger took your place. But Epaphroditus, whatever his faults, and they were numerous, kept his word. On Epictetus's 15th birthday, such as birthdays existed for slaves, he was pulled from the kitchens and brought to a small room where an old Greek man sat, surrounded by scrolls. "This is Musonius Rufus," Epaphroditus said. "You'll study with him. If you prove capable, you'll serve as a secretary. If not, back to the kitchens." Musonius Rufus looked at Epictetus with eyes that seemed to see through skin and bone to whatever lived underneath. He was small, compact, with the kind of stillness that comes from having stopped fighting the world's chaos. "Can you read?" Musonius asked. "A little," Epictetus said, which was generous. He'd picked up some Greek and Latin from the kitchen, enough to decipher labels and instructions, but nothing more. "Can you think?" The question surprised him. "I don't understand." "Good. Most people who claim to understand thinking understand nothing." Musonius gestured to a stool. "Sit. Tell me what you were doing before you came here." "Grinding grain." And what were you thinking while you ground it? Epictetus hesitated. The truth felt dangerous, but lying to this man seemed impossible. I was thinking about freedom. What kind of freedom? The normal kind, not being a slave. Musonius smiled, and it wasn't kind or unkind, it simply was. And if I told you that freedom has nothing to do with whether you're a slave, would you think me mad? Yes. Excellent. Honesty is rarer than intelligence. The old philosopher unrolled a scroll. We'll begin with Chrysippus. He was insufferable and brilliant in equal measure, which means you'll hate him and learn from him simultaneously. And so Epictetus's education began. Learning, he discovered, was nothing like he'd imagined. He'd assumed it would be memorization, rote facts poured into his head like water into a jar. Instead, Musonius taught by asking questions that had no answers, or rather, had too many answers, each one branching into new questions. What is the good life? Musonius would ask. Happiness, Epictetus would respond, parroting what he'd heard. What is happiness? Pleasure, comfort, freedom from pain. Is that why dogs seem so happy when they're fed? Because they understand the good life? Dogs don't understand anything. Then why do you trust your definition of happiness if it's indistinguishable from a dog's satisfaction? These exchanges would spiral for hours, and Epictetus would leave each session feeling like he knew less than when he'd entered. But something was changing in him, some fundamental shift in how he saw the world. The walls of Epaphroditus' house looked the same, marble and painted plaster, but they meant something different. They were just walls. They could contain his body, but not whatever it was that asked questions about happiness. One afternoon, after a particularly brutal session on the nature of virtue, Musonius set down his stylus and looked at Epictetus directly. You understand that all of this, he gestured to the scrolls, the room, the world beyond, is pointless if you don't apply it. I apply it? No, you collect it, like a miser hoards gold. You're gathering knowledge without spending it. Musonius stood, his joints creaking. Philosophy isn't about knowing things. It's about being things. You can memorize every word Zeno ever wrote about virtue and still be a coward. You can recite Cleanthes' hymn to Zeus and still rage when it rains on your plans. Then what's the point of studying? The point is transformation. You study so that one day, when you face something terrible, and you will, everyone does, you don't shatter. You bend, you adapt, you remain yourself, only more so. Epictetus absorbed this, filed it away with all the other things Musonius had said that sounded wise but felt impossible to implement. He was 17 when the first test came. Epaphroditus. In one of his rages, the household had learned to read them like weather patterns, called Epictetus, into his private chambers. The master was drunk, which was common, but this time the drunkenness had a cruel edge. Stand there, Epaphroditus said, pointing to the center of the room. My friends tell me you're becoming educated, refined. They say you quote Chrysippus at dinner. I only quote him when asked, Master. Don't interrupt. I didn't ask you a question. Epaphroditus circled him, and Epictetus felt something wrong in the air, something predatory. An educated slave is still a slave. You understand this? Yes, master. I wonder if you do. Epaphroditus grabbed Epictetus's leg, the left one, and began twisting. Your teacher says you're learning about the will, about what we control and don't control. Let's test that. The pain started as pressure, then sharpened into something white-hot. Epictetus heard his own breathing quicken, felt his body's automatic response to flee, fight, something. But Musonius's voice echoed in his head. What is in your control? What is not? His leg, not in his control. Epaphroditus's cruelty, not in his control. His response, his, entirely his. Master, he said, voice steady despite the fire in his leg, if you continue twisting, you'll break it. Epaphroditus twisted harder. Will I? Yes, the bone will snap, and then I'll be a lame slave, less useful to you. But that's your choice. The snap was audible. Epictetus heard it before he felt it, a sound like green wood breaking, and then the pain was everything, not sharp, but huge, encompassing, a universe of wrong. He didn't scream, not because he was strong, but because screaming felt like surrender, like giving Epaphroditus something he wanted. Instead, he looked at his master and said, I told you it would break. Epaphroditus released him, and Epictetus collapsed. Through the haze of pain, he saw something flicker across his master's face. Not remorse, but something close to fear. The slave had been right. The master had been wrong. And in that moment, in that tiny reversal of power, something fundamental shifted. Get out, Epaphroditus said. Find someone to set it. Epictetus dragged himself out, his leg useless, and in the corridor he found Musonius waiting. The old philosopher had heard, had known, had understood. Can you walk? Musonius asked. Eventually. Can you think? Always. Musonius smiled. Then you're still free. They set the leg poorly. There was no money for a proper physician for a slave, and the bone healed crooked, leaving Epictetus with a limp he'd carry the rest of his life. But something else healed straight. His understanding of what philosophy meant. It wasn't about discussing virtue in a comfortable room. It was about finding virtue in the moment your leg was breaking, in the space between stimulus and response where choice lived. Epaphroditus had taken his mobility. He'd never touched Epictetus's mind. The years that followed were strange. Epictetus continued studying with Musonius, but now with an intensity that bordered on obsession. The philosophy that had been abstract became concrete. Every teaching was tested against experience, refined by reality. You're changing, Musonius observed one day, 3 years after the incident with the leg. You're angry. I'm not angry. You're furious. You're just directing it inward, which is more dangerous than expressing it outward. The old man poured wine, watered it heavily. Even philosophers practiced moderation. Tell me what you're thinking. I'm thinking that all of this virtue, wisdom, the good life is beautiful philosophy, but doesn't change anything. I'm still a slave. My leg still hurts. Epaphroditus is still cruel. Where's the transformation you promised? I never promised transformation would be visible. I said it was the point, not that you'd see it. Musonius sipped his wine. You're making the same mistake everyone makes. You think philosophy should change your circumstances. It doesn't.
It changes how you experience your circumstances. That sounds like accepting oppression. It sounds like that to people who confuse external freedom with internal freedom. They're not the same thing. Musonius leaned forward. You can be enslaved and free simultaneously. You can be legally free and enslaved simultaneously. The chains on your body are real, but they're not the only chains. Most people are imprisoned by their desires, their fears, their need for approval, their terror of death. You could remove every physical restraint and they'd still be slaves. So, I should just accept being property? I didn't say that. I said you should understand what you can change and what you can't. You can't change Epaphroditus. You can change how Epaphroditus affects your inner life. You can't change the past. You can change what the past means to you. You can't control outcomes. You can control efforts. Epictetus stood, testing his bad leg, feeling the familiar ache. And if efforts don't matter because someone else controls the results, then your efforts still matter because they're the only thing you truly own. Epaphroditus owns your body. He doesn't own your choices. He can torture you, but he can't make you hate him. He can break your leg, but he can't break your will. That's yours. That's the only thing that's entirely yours. The words settled into Epictetus like seeds in soil, and he carried them as the seasons changed, as Rome burned and rebuilt, as emperors rose and fell, as his 20s became his 30s. He began teaching other slaves, quietly, in the moments between servitude. Not formally, that would have been forbidden, but in conversations, in answers to questions, in the way he carried himself. People noticed. A slave who limped but didn't complain. A property who read philosophy and didn't use it as escape, but as engagement. "How do you do it?" a young kitchen slave asked him once. "How do you not hate them?" "I do hate them sometimes," Epictetus admitted. "Hate is a natural response to injustice, but I don't let the hate own me. I observe it like watching weather. It comes, it goes. I don't build a house in it." That sounds impossible. It is impossible most of the time. I fail constantly, but the failing matters less than the attempting. Every moment is a new chance to choose how you respond. Freedom came unexpectedly, as most profound changes do. Epictetus was 32 when Nero died, and chaos erupted. Epaphroditus, who'd been involved in the emperor's death, found himself suddenly vulnerable. The household disbanded overnight. Slaves were sold, scattered, lost to the wind of political change. But Epictetus wasn't sold. In the confusion, in the reshuffling of property and power, he simply walked out. No one stopped him. No one cared. The empire was too busy tearing itself apart to notice one lame slave becoming one free man. He found Musonius Rufus, who'd been exiled and had recently returned, living in a small house outside Rome. "I'm free," Epictetus said, the words still strange in his mouth. "Were you not free yesterday?" Musonius asked, smiling. "Legally, no. Legally is the least important kind of freedom." The old philosopher gestured inside. "But I'm glad you're here. We have work to do." "What work?"
the same work we've always done, except now you'll do it as a teacher, not a student." Epictetus laughed. "Who would study with a former slave? A cripple? I have no credentials, no lineage, no—" "You have experience. You have understanding. You have the thing most philosophers lack. You've tested the teachings against real suffering." Musonius stood. "Philosophy without suffering is just conversation. Philosophy through suffering is transformation. You've been transformed. Now transform others." And so, improbably, impossibly, Epictetus became a teacher. He started small, in rented rooms, with students who came out of curiosity more than conviction. But word spread. A philosopher who'd been a slave, who taught that external circumstances didn't determine internal freedom, who lived what he taught. This was novel in Rome, where most philosophers came from privilege and discussed poverty from a comfortable distance. The students came in trickles, then streams, young men from good families seeking an education, former slaves seeking understanding, veterans seeking peace, all of them asking the same question Arian would ask decades later: "How do I know what to do?"
And Epictetus's answer was always the same. You already know. You're just afraid to admit you know. Years passed. Rome's chaos settled into new patterns of tyranny. Domitian became emperor and, suspicious of philosophers, banished them from Italy. Epictetus moved to Nicopolis in Greece and established a school there. He never married. He never accumulated wealth. He lived simply, teaching anyone who came, asking nothing but attention in return. His reputation grew despite his efforts to keep it small. People called him wise, which he found ridiculous. Wise people didn't spend 30 years as slaves. Wise people didn't limp. Wise people didn't wake up some mornings and wonder what the point was. But he taught anyway, because teaching was the work, and the work was the point. One evening, an older student, a man who'd fought in 3 wars and carried the scars to prove it, asked him, "Do you ever regret it? The years in slavery? The leg? All of it?" Epictetus considered this. The honest answer was complicated. "I regret the pain in the moment of pain. I don't regret what the pain taught me. If I could go back and choose a different life, one of comfort and ease, I don't know that I'd be trading up. That life wouldn't have made me who I am, and I've worked too hard becoming who I am to wish I was someone else." So suffering has purpose? No, suffering is just suffering, but we can give it purpose by how we respond to it. We can let it break us, or we can let it break us open. Both are valid responses. Both are human, but only one leads to growth. The student absorbed this, and Epictetus saw him wrestling with it, trying to apply it to his own wars, his own scars. "The problem," Epictetus continued, "is that we confuse acceptance with approval. I accept that my leg was broken. I don't approve of Epaphroditus breaking it. I accept that I was enslaved. I don't approve of slavery. Acceptance is acknowledging reality. Approval is endorsing it. We can accept what we can't change while still working to change what we can. And how do you know the difference? You ask yourself, is this in my control or not? If it's in your control, your thoughts, your choices, your responses, then you're responsible for it.
If it's not, other people's actions, natural disasters, the past, then you're responsible for how you relate to it, but not for it itself. This teaching, this division between what was within human control and what lay beyond it, became the foundation of everything Epictetus taught. It was deceptively simple and impossibly difficult to practice. Students would nod in understanding, then dissolve in rage when it rained on their vacation plans. You understand it intellectually, he'd tell them. Now you need to understand it in your bones. And that only comes through practice, through failing, through trying again. Arian, sitting in the morning light, listening to this story unfold, interrupted. But you're talking about acceptance. Isn't that just giving up? If we accept everything we can't control, don't we become passive? Doesn't the world stay broken? Epictetus shifted his weight, felt his leg protest. You're confusing acceptance with inaction. I accept that Rome has slavery. I teach anyone who comes, slave or free, hoping to change minds. I accept that I can't personally dismantle the entire system. I can change the people who might someday dismantle it. That's not passivity. That's strategic action. But what if everyone thought like that? What if everyone just accepted injustice? They wouldn't be accepting injustice. They'd be accepting their current inability to change it while working to develop the ability. There's a difference between I can't change this, so I'll do nothing, and I can't change this today, so I'll work on what I can change. Myself, others, ideas, until I can. Arian frowned. It still feels like a compromise. All of life is compromise. The question is whether you're compromising your principles or just your timeline. Epictetus smiled. You want immediate solutions to permanent problems. You want a formula that guarantees rightness. But life doesn't work like that. You make your best guess based on incomplete information. Act on it, adjust based on results, and repeat. Sometimes you succeed. Sometimes you fail. Sometimes you can't tell the difference. Then, what's the point of philosophy if it doesn't give us answers? Philosophy gives us better questions. It trains us to think clearly, act virtuously, and remain steady when everything's falling apart. That's not nothing, that's everything. The sun had risen higher now, and other students were beginning to arrive, their voices carrying through the morning air. Arian looked at his scrolls, at the future his father had planned, at the life he wanted but feared choosing. I think, he said slowly, I'm going to stay in Nicopolis with you. Why? Because everything you've said terrifies me. And I think that means it's true. Comfortable lies don't scare people. Difficult truths do. Epictetus nodded. Then let me tell you the most terrifying truth I know. You're free. Completely, utterly free. You always have been. The chains you feel are ones you've forged yourself from other people's expectations, your own fears, your attachment to outcomes you can't control. You can remove them anytime you want, but removing them means taking responsibility for your own life, and that's scarier than any slavery. How do I remove them? One link at a time, one choice at a time. Every moment you choose virtue over comfort, truth over convenience, growth over security. That's a link removed. It's not dramatic. It's not sudden. It's just daily work, repeated until it becomes who you are. Arion stood, and Epictetus saw the young man wrestling with himself, with the weight of choosing his own path. Will you teach me? Really teach me, not just let me sit in on lectures? I've been teaching you this whole time. You just weren't paying attention. Epictetus gestured to the door. Go. Think. Decide. Come back tomorrow or don't. Either choice is yours. As Arion left, Epictetus sat alone with the morning and his thoughts. The spider in the corner had finished its web, perfect and temporary, existing because it existed without needing justification. He thought about his life, the trajectory from slave to teacher, from broken leg to broken open heart. None of it made sense as a story. Stories had heroes and villains, clear arcs, satisfying resolutions. His life had been messier than that. Random cruelty and random kindness. Suffering that taught nothing and suffering that taught everything. Choices that mattered and choices that didn't. But somewhere in the mess, he'd found something that mattered. The ability to choose how he responded. Epaphroditus had owned his body, but not his mind. Rome could exile him, but not touch his principles. Age could weaken his leg, but not his will. That was the secret he'd been trying to teach all these years. The thing students kept missing because they were looking for something more complicated. You are free right now, not later, not after you achieve something, not when circumstances change. Right now. The only question is whether you'll recognize your freedom and use it, or deny it and suffer. More students arrived, filling the small space with their questions and confusions, their fears and hopes. Epictetus greeted each one, asked them about their lives, listened to their concerns. A young woman worried about her father's disapproval, an old man terrified of death, a merchant afraid of losing his business, all of them seeking certainty in an uncertain world. "Let me tell you something," Epictetus said when they'd all settled. "You came here thinking I had answers. I don't. What I have is a method for finding your own answers, and the method is simple. Ask yourself in any situation what's in your control and what's not. Then act on what's in your control and accept what's not." "But teacher," the young woman said, "my father controls my marriage prospects, my inheritance, my reputation. What's in my control?" "Your character, your choices, your responses. Your father can control many external things. He can't control whether you become bitter or graceful, vengeful or forgiving, small or large-hearted. Those are yours. That feels like small consolation when I might lose everything. You can't lose what you never had. You think you own your reputation? You don't. Other people create it in their minds. You think you own your future? You don't. Fate, chance, and other people's choices shape it. The only thing you truly own is this moment, this choice, this response. And that's enough if you let it be." The old man spoke up, his voice shaking. "I'm dying. The physicians say I have months, maybe a year. How do I accept that?" Epictetus looked at him with compassion. Death was the ultimate test of philosophy. Everything sounded wise until you faced oblivion. "You've been dying since you were born. We all have. The physicians just gave you more specific information. Nothing fundamental has changed." "Everything has changed." Has it? You still have this moment. You still have choices about how to spend your remaining time. You still have your character, your relationships, your ability to face death with dignity or fall apart. Death takes your body. What does it take that actually matters? The old man thought about this. You're saying my life has the same value now as it did before the diagnosis? I'm saying your life has the value you give it through how you live it. A year lived well is worth more than decades lived poorly. You can spend your remaining time terrified of death, or you can spend it practicing death, learning to let go, to release attachments, to face the inevitable with courage. One path makes your last days torture. The other makes them meaningful. They discussed this for hours, turning the question over like a jeweler examining a gem from every angle. And through it all, Epictetus felt the familiar satisfaction of the work. This was why he taught, not because he had answers, but because helping others find their own answers was the closest thing to meaning he'd discovered. That evening, after the students had left, Epictetus sat outside watching the sun set over Nicopolis. His leg ached, as it always did when weather changed. He was old now, or getting there, and his body reminded him daily of its mortality. But his mind felt clear, sharper even than in youth. Everything he'd experienced, the slavery, the cruelty, the years of study, the teaching, had refined him like ore becoming steel. He wasn't grateful for the suffering. He was grateful for what he'd become through it. Arrian returned, as Epictetus had suspected he would. The young man's face showed signs of tears, of wrestling, of transformation's early stages. I told my father I'm staying, Arrian said. I told him philosophy matters more than politics, that understanding myself matters more than wealth. How did he respond? He disowned me. Epictetus nodded. And how do you feel? Terrified, relieved, free, trapped? I don't know. All of it simultaneously? Good. That's honest. The people who claim to feel only one thing are lying, usually to themselves. Epictetus gestured for Arrian to sit. Your father can disown you legally. He can't disown you from yourself. You're still his son. He's still your father. Those facts exist independent of his approval or disapproval. But I've lost his support, his name, his external gifts. You haven't lost his genetics, his influence on your character, the lessons he taught you, good and bad. You haven't lost your own ability to create support, to make a name through your actions, to build a life that matters. Arrian wiped his eyes. This is harder than you make it sound in lectures. Everything's harder than it sounds in lectures. Lectures are theory. Life is practice. And practice means failing repeatedly until you don't. Epictetus smiled. You did something difficult today. You chose your own path over someone else's expectations. That's worth more than any inheritance. Will it always be this hard? Sometimes harder, sometimes easier, but it gets familiar. You develop strength through repetition, like a muscle. The first time you choose principle over comfort, it feels impossible. The 100th time, it feels natural. Not easy, but natural. They sat in silence as darkness fell, and Epictetus thought about all the students who'd sat in this same spot, asking the same questions, seeking the same assurances. Some stayed with philosophy.
Others abandoned it when life got difficult. But all of them, in asking the questions, had started the journey. "Tell me something," Arian said. "Do you ever wish things had been different, easier?" Epictetus considered this. The truth was complicated, as truth usually was. "I wish Epaphroditus hadn't broken my leg. I don't wish I'd never met him, because then I'd never have studied with Musonius. I wish slavery didn't exist. I don't wish I'd never been enslaved, because it taught me things freedom never could. I wish life was easier. I don't wish I was the person an easy life would have made me." That sounds like accepting suffering. It's accepting reality. Suffering happened. I can't change that, but I can choose what it means, what I do with it, who I become through it. That's not acceptance of suffering. That's transformation through experience. Arian absorbed this, and Epictetus saw him trying to apply it to his own situation, his own loss. So my father's rejection can become what? Wisdom? It can become whatever you make it. An excuse for bitterness or a catalyst for growth. A story about abandonment or a story about choosing authenticity. Neither version is more true than the other. You decide which story to tell yourself, and that story shapes who you become. How do I know which story to choose? Ask yourself which story leads to virtue, not which feels better. Virtue often feels terrible in the moment, but which makes you better, which develops your character, strengthens your will, moves you toward the person you want to be. "The second one," Arian said quietly. "The story about choosing authenticity. Then that's your story, not because it's objectively true, but because it's useful. And usefulness is its own kind of truth." The years that followed were Epictetus's most productive. Students came from across the empire to study with the lame philosopher who taught freedom while limping, who discussed virtue from a position of poverty, who embodied his teachings rather than just speaking them. Arian stayed, and over time became more than a student. He became a chronicler. Every morning, he'd sit with his wax tablets and record what Epictetus said, the discussions with students, the principles taught through stories and questions. "Why do you write all this down?" Epictetus asked him one day, watching the young man's hand move rapidly across the tablet. "Because you won't. Because these teachings matter. Because someday you'll be gone and people will still need them. I'll be forgotten within a generation. Everyone is." "I don't think so. Not this. What you're teaching, it's universal. It works for slaves and emperors, for the powerful and powerless, for ancient times and future ones." Arian looked up. "You're teaching people how to be free regardless of their circumstances. That's not going to become irrelevant." Epictetus shook his head, but he didn't stop Arian from writing. And as the years passed, the young man's recordings grew into volumes, conversations, principles, applications. The discourses, people would eventually call them, though Epictetus himself never called them anything. More students arrived. Some stayed for years. Others came for a single conversation and left transformed. Each one brought their own suffering, their own questions, their own desperate need for certainty in an uncertain world. A soldier asked how to face battle without fear. Epictetus told him fear was natural,
that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but action despite it. You can't control whether you feel fear. You can control whether fear controls you. A merchant asked how to handle financial ruin. Epictetus told him that wealth was external, character internal, and only internal things had real value. Lose your money, you're still you. Lose your character, and you've lost everything worth having. A mother asked how to cope with her child's death, and for this, Epictetus had no easy answers, because grief was the price of love, and love was worth the price. Your child was a gift, not a possession. Gifts are temporary.
That doesn't make them less valuable. It makes them more precious because of their impermanence. Grieve fully, love completely, and know that your child's value isn't diminished by their absence. Each question, each student, each conversation refined his teaching. Philosophy wasn't abstract theory. It was applied wisdom, tested against real suffering, proved or disproved by lived experience. Epictetus was in his 60s when the summons came from Rome. The new emperor, Hadrian, wanted to meet the philosopher who taught that emperors and slaves were equal in the eyes of reason. "Will you go?" Arian asked, concerned. Travel was difficult for Epictetus now, his bad leg worse with age. "I'll go. An emperor's curiosity is a command dressed in courtesy." The journey to Rome took weeks, and every mile reminded Epictetus of his age, his limitations, his mortality. But when he finally stood before Hadrian in the palace, the same palace where he'd once served as a slave, he felt only amused detachment. "You don't bow," Hadrian observed. "I can't. My leg." Epictetus gestured to his limp. "An old injury from my time as property." "I could order you to bow." You could order many things. Whether I'd comply is a different question." Hadrian smiled. "They said you were bold. I'm told you teach that I have no real power." "I teach that you have enormous power over externals, property, bodies, resources. You have no power over internals, people's minds, their wills, their choices about how to respond to you. And if I demonstrate my power over externals by executing you, then you'd prove my point. You can kill my body. You can't touch my will. You can end my life. You can't make me fear death. Power that depends on compliance isn't real power. It's force, pretending to be power." Hadrian studied him. "You're not afraid of me. I'm afraid of many things. You're not one of them. You're just a man who happened to be born into circumstances that gave you authority. You didn't earn it. You didn't deserve it. You just have it. Why would I fear that?" Most people find emperors intimidating. Most people confuse the office with the person, the power with the man. You're just Hadrian. Remove the title, the guards, the palace, and you're just another human trying to figure out how to live well. Same as me, same as everyone. They talked for hours, and Epictetus found himself surprised by the emperor. Hadrian was intelligent, genuinely curious, wrestling with the same questions everyone wrestled with, just with higher stakes. How do you use power wisely? How do you know you're making the right choices? How do you live with the consequences of decisions that affect millions? "The problem with being emperor," Hadrian said, "is that every choice matters enormously, and I can't know which choices are right until it's too late to change them."
That's the problem with being human, Epictetus corrected. Emperor just amplifies it. You think the slave sweeping your floors doesn't face the same uncertainty? He doesn't know if his choice to trust a friend or stay silent about injustice will lead to disaster. The scale is different. The uncertainty is identical. So what do we do? How do we live with not knowing? We accept that we'll never know for certain. We make our best guess based on virtue. Does this choice develop character, help others, align with wisdom? We act. We observe results. We adjust. We repeat. That's all anyone can do, emperor or slave. Hadrian nodded slowly. You've given me much to think about. Don't think about it, do it. Philosophy is worthless without practice. You could spend your entire reign contemplating wisdom and still be a terrible emperor if you never apply it. Epictetus returned to Nicopolis exhausted but satisfied. He'd met an emperor as an equal, not because of any external accomplishment, but because his mind was his own, and no title could touch that. Was he wise? Arrian asked, when Epictetus recounted the conversation. He was curious, which is the beginning of wisdom. Whether he'll develop that curiosity into actual wisdom depends on whether he practices or just contemplates. Do you think he will? I think he has the same chance as anyone else. Being emperor doesn't make wisdom easier or harder. It just makes the consequences of wisdom or folly more visible. The final years of Epictetus's life were quiet. He taught smaller classes, wrote nothing himself, but let Arrian continue recording and spent more time alone with his thoughts. His body was failing in the way all bodies eventually fail, but his mind remained sharp. Students asked him if he was afraid of death. He told them he'd been practicing death his entire life, letting go of attachments, accepting impermanence, releasing control of outcomes. Death was just the final letting go. And he'd become good at letting go. But what comes after? A young student asked. Don't you wonder? I wonder constantly. I don't worry about it. If there's an afterlife, I'll experience it then. If there's not, I won't be around to be disappointed. Either way, worrying now changes nothing. That seems cold. It's practical. I have limited time and energy. Why spend it on questions I can't answer when I could spend it on choices I can make? On what turned out to be his final day teaching, Epictetus spoke to a group of students about the fundamentals he'd been teaching for decades. His voice was weak, his body frail, but his mind was clear. Everything I've taught you can be summarized simply. Some things are in your control, some things are not. Focus on what you control, your thoughts, your choices, your responses. Accept what you don't control, other people, outcomes, the past, death. Live according to virtue, wisdom, courage, justice, moderation. Practice daily. Fail constantly. Keep trying anyway. That's it? A student asked, sounding disappointed. After all these years, that's the whole teaching? That's the whole teaching. Everything else is just application, variation, example. The truth is simple. Living it is hard. Most people want complex truths because then they have an excuse for not living them. Simple truths remove that excuse. But there must be more. Secret teachings, advanced wisdom. Epictetus smiled. The secret teaching is that there are no secret teachings. The advanced wisdom is basic wisdom, practiced consistently until it becomes second nature. You want mystery because mystery feels profound. Simplicity feels insufficient.
But simple doesn't mean easy. Simple means clear, and clarity is what you need, not complexity. He died that night in his sleep, in the small room where he'd taught thousands of students over decades. No monuments were erected. No official mourning was declared. He owned almost nothing, so there was nothing to distribute. He was simply gone, the way all people eventually are. But Arian had his writings, the discourses, the Enchiridion, decades of teachings preserved not in monuments, but in words. 2,000 years later, those words remain. Epictetus's teachings outlived the empire that enslaved him, the emperors who ruled him, the circumstances that oppressed him. They outlived everything external because they weren't about externals. They were about the one thing that survives any circumstance: the human will and its capacity to choose how it responds. People still read his words and find in them the same thing his students found: not answers, but a method for finding their own answers. Not certainty, but a way to live with uncertainty. Not a guarantee of happiness, but a path to virtue, which sometimes feels better than happiness because it doesn't depend on anything external. And in those words, in that teaching, in that simple division between what we control and what we don't, lives the legacy of a slave who became free not through circumstances changing, but through understanding that he'd always been free, if only he recognized it. His leg never healed properly, his circumstances never became comfortable, his life never became easy. But he became who he wanted to be, lived according to his principles, and taught others to do the same. And in the end, that's all anyone can do. All anyone has ever been able to do, from ancient Rome to the present moment. The story of Epictetus is the story of every human who's ever faced suffering and asked, "What now?" His answer echoes across centuries, simple and difficult in equal measure. You choose. You've always been able to choose. Now choose well. If you enjoyed this story, kindly hit the subscribe button. See you on the next one.